Welcome to Ukulele Club, everyone. I'm Kalani Das, and I'm so excited to have an expert music educator on the show today. Welcome to Richard Lawton. Thanks for being here, Richard.
Thank you for having me, Kalani.
Yeah, so we go back a little bit. We've seen each
A
other
little
at the
bit.
California Music Educators Conferences and so forth. And we're neighbors in a way.
We just found that out, actually.
Yeah, I'm in the West Valley. You're in by
Right.
Paramount Studios, right? So yeah, very, very, very cool. I appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to tap into your experience and knowledge as a fellow Orff teacher. And if people don't know what that is, I'm going to say they can go look it up because we don't want to have that whole conversation again. But Orff-Schulwerk, the holistic, student-centered approach to music education, which you are trained in and you practice. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your kind of general philosophy, Orff, and tie it into why you use how you use the ukulele as an Orff component.
Right. Well, Orff-Schulwerk, as you know, Kalani, it is experiential, as you say, and it's more about trying to. It asks students to be the composers. I mean, it was the famous Karl Orff quote, "Let students be their own composers." So it differs in a lot of ways from other forms of music education in that what we do is very much open-ended. We create windows of opportunity. In fact, I use that terminology with my students a lot. I talk about this is your window to improvise, to create something, to compose something. And we do that in a variety of ways, using graphic notation, using these specially prepared xylophones called the barred instruments. And increasingly, in recent times, I've been using the ukulele for that. And that's become even more of an imperative in this time of distance learning because the xylophones, the prepared xylophones, can't be sent home. There's not enough of them and so on. But the ukuleles can be sent home. And it's reached a point now when I started using the ukuleles in conjunction with the Orff xylophones and other what they call the instrumentarium. When I added them to the instrumentarium, they were about $100 a unit, sometimes even a bit more, and the prices have come way down. You can get a decent, actually better than decent, ukulele on the market now for $60 a unit, and that comes with all kinds of great things, a tuner, a little strap, that kind of thing. So
Right.
it's become an affordable solution to the problem of how do you teach elemental music. Let me back up a little bit. So I say elemental music. What I'm talking about is the most essential musical idea and building out from that. So if we say that using the terminology of ta and tt, if we say that I'm going to pat on the tt ta, that's and we talk about that in the context of building bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one sort of dominant way to teach Orff-Schulwerk. But of course, there's so much more to music, and this idea of beginning with the most essential element seems to resonate with kids, and it can be adapted to. That's the other thing that's great about Orff-Schulwerk is it can be adapted to all kinds of folkloric forms and world
Right.
music forms and so on.
Right, exactly. And when I first noticed that the ukulele was being embraced more, into the education field, and this happened maybe, maybe starting like 15 years ago, and then kind of ramping up, 10 years ago, and then now it's been gangbusters. I was super excited for the reasons that you mentioned, like the accessibility of the ukulele, being that its open strings are in that beloved C pentatonic.
I'm
It's
glad you
right.
mentioned that.
It's right
Exactly.
there. Yeah. Maybe could you
And
talk a little bit about that?
yes, I will. And so the in the Orff-Schulwerk, there are summer levels training all over the country, and so what they do is they take you through the volumes of music for children, which is the great sort of uh, compendium of musical ideas by Orff and his partner Gunnar Kateman. And so volume one is all pentatonic material, and it's all in C.
Right.
So one of the things that leaps out at you if you've got any Orff training and you stumble upon ukulele, or if you're an ukulele player and stumble upon Orff-Schulwerk, is that there's this great match of this wonderful, I mean, really wonderful elemental material, which can be played beautifully on ukulele and by and large on open strings. Um, exactly. So you're what we're
Yeah.
missing, what, Ray, right? So we're missing
Right.
the D, and that's
Right.
easy to show. So I have, so I have the similar thing here. So we're missing, as I say, is the Ray, which is the
Right.
second box on the third string. So it's very, very easy for students to be immediately successful. I think this is what in my experience, the most important thing is, and the thing that makes this different from the way I learned music as a kid, is that when I learned music as a kid, it was all about learning the notes on the page and a long delay before there was any kind of satisfying musical experience.
Right.
But with the ukulele, you get a very pretty sound just strumming on the open strings or strumming back and forth here. And there's a couple of specific Orff features. I'll give you one for an example. We can talk about this more in a little while. But the Bourdon, which is the bass line in an Orff-Schulwerk arrangement, in C, there's a couple different ways you can play it. But mostly what you can do is you can just pluck on the 3 and the 4 string.
Right. Right.
And you have the 1-5, the C-G combination.
Right.
And you can do what they call a broken Bourdon. And so on. So
Yeah.
a student in your ukulele class, and again, this is the in-person class, we'll talk about how we modify this for the virtual classroom, but the student who arrives in your class the first day, who has never picked up a ukulele before, perhaps if it's, particularly here in Los Angeles, a public school, maybe English is not their first language. They can do that on day one. And so what that means is they can make a powerful contribution to the collective music making thing that's going on. And, it feels good to do it. If you have any doubts about that, get out your ukulele and try finding the songs. You'll quickly, if you're a ukulele player like you and I are, you quickly figure out what all the pop songs are that are in C.
Right.
My personal favorite is Yes We Can by the Pointer Sisters. So you could just kind of get out your ukulele and strum along on those open strings, and it's a very intoxicating feeling. And for kids, it feels like adult music making.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's real music. There's a lot of music out there. There's quite a few. Well, I wouldn't say a ton, but a few one chord songs. Right. You get that C7 or A7 one finger chord, and you can play. You can play Baby Shark. You can play
Baby Shark for sure, and then depending on how far back you go in the pop catalog,
Achy Breaky
25
Heart
or 64 by Chicago is in A minor, most of it. So you can kind of, kids get da 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 da. They can do that that's a one finger chord as well. So,
right, a lot of one finger chords.
Yeah, there's lots of great stuff out there.
In addition to, like you said, the open strings, and I just want to add for anybody that's watching as an idea. You mentioned a Bourdon, either broken or you could just do a kind of a
pluck the strings together.
Plucked, yeah. And then what I also like about the ukulele is you've got these, the fret markers, the dots, and I always tell people do an A string improvisation and just play the dots, and of course
that.
C. Yeah, this one doesn't have a dot on C, but you can start on A. Again, pentatonic scale.
Right. Well, you get into in the pentatonic. So as you know, and many of your listeners, watchers, listeners, whatever, would know is that the pentatonic scale has no. It's not like the diatonic scale, which has this is the home note or whatever.
Right.
In the pentatonic scale, theoretically, all the notes are equal. In value.
Right.
So that means you can start as your home note. Do, re, mi, so, or la.
Right.
And what we in the trade have discovered is that la pentatonic is really groovy, and so the A minor actually matches up very nicely with a lot of the things the ukulele can do, which would be your C pentatonic with a la, based on la as the home tone.
Right.
And You have an open A string, so you've got the possibility of doing that as well. Like basically, as you just said, improvising on the A string. So um, it's pretty versatile with very little actual genuine music instruction. The other thing that you're doing, and that I have found too, is that there's a I think that we make the mistake coming from a guitar background, the assumption that picking individual strings is somehow more complicated than strumming chords. What I find with my students, so I teach this in third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade, is that in some ways picking the individual strings is easier.
Mm.
And so, but what it does do is because everybody, kids are growing, have grown up in this era of the guitar solo. The fact that you're picking individual strings feels very sophisticated to them,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a like a really delightful, light. I mean, the instruments sound beautiful, even if you're just strumming on open strings like raindrops, on top of each other. It sounds lovely.
That's a really
So,
valid point. Yeah, and I can get the connection too between they see people doing the solos, they
right.
see people playing melodies, so why not join in with that? And and if they can do it, do it.
Right, and this is the thing. I mean that like motivation is such an important thing, especially now in the distance learning environment. It's very. I mean, when you teach in a way that requires that you're hooking the students on the experience, so they have this experience. It's a great experience, and they want to know more, and that's the big selling point of just about any of the. I mean, all of there are a number of different elementary and general music pedagogies, as you know, and they all have things to recommend them. But the thing that the common denominator is, it's great at getting people active right away. And so when you're not able to do that, you really do have to keep it because attention spans go down.
Right.
The amount of and we know also that the synchronicity, which is such an important thing. After all, the ukulele is essentially a percussion instrument. So if you can't play it percussively in sync with everyone else, how do you deal with that? And
Right.
its accessibility is what makes it wonderful for that reason, because student can just start messing around with it and create really interesting, unusual sounding stuff right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a video I made, and I just call it chords with a K and a Z. So KORDZ. And I say, just have your students make up their own chords
Yeah.
with any notes, right? So they just go in and they just start attacking, and they find a couple weird notes, and then they do that, and then they maybe sing over it or play two different versions. So even when we're learning the instrument, we don't have to stay in the lane of like all the traditional typical chords. We can say you could make up your own chords. Just play anything that sounds good to you, and then share it and and then flip it around like we do in Orff a lot of the time. Is go do something, come back and show us what you did. Show us what
Exactly.
you came up with, right? And make some music. I want to
Right. Well,
go
the idea is to give them ideas, not to
right.
sort of give them information, to kind of give them some raw material that they can make their own connections. And
Exactly.
where that goes, I think it's important to be. When I started teaching music, I was struck by the fact that we tend to, when we're talking about very young musicians, young composers, we tend to be very like we can look at a drawing from a kindergartner and say, "Oh, this is lovely,"
Hmm.
but somehow music made by a kindergartner is not so lovely, and there's a lot of physiological reasons
Right.
why, in terms of the way the sound waves hit our ear and what have you. But what I've spent a lot of time doing, what I also recommend to teachers that they do, and particularly with your parent community, is start to educate them about what to look for. So
Hmm.
it helps to say to parents, when parents are saying, "Oh, they sound great," to say to that parent, "Look how engaged they are."
Right.
Because that's really, when you're teaching kids, there are very, very few children's groups that even the best group you ever had is going to sound good enough to be, "Hey, I would have paid $25 to see that." I mean, we are invested in it because it's our children, and because our job is to train them, whatever. But for them, the experience of actually making music, that self-expressive part, is also part of this elemental idea that there's something very, very basic about that, the need to do it and the need to have it acknowledged by the community. And so while you're teaching this, you also need to be thinking about ways to deal with the fact that some people, like you just, the chord thing you were just, that exercise, which is lovely. You have to find a way to prepare people to listen to a presentation of that kind of music. What does that sound like? But it is, after all, usually their parents, so that's a pretty safe audience.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's
kind of hard to go wrong there. Yeah.
Exactly. And they want, they want to get that moment and, the memory of when they're in third, fourth, fifth grade and doing the presentation. But I want to, just on that point too, I want to reiterate that part of our job as music educators is not to task students with a job to do where they're working for us, right? We need to be always their coach and their cheerleader and help them express their music, right? So it's not about what we think. And parents and adults tend to be the most conservative people when it comes to art, I think. As adults sometimes, especially as we get through teenage years, we get actually really conservative and very intolerant of other things. We get very judgmental, right, which is just restrictive. So I love the early elementary music makers because they're fearless. They go for it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you know, Kalani, that is not a characteristic found in most adult musicians, fearlessness.
Right.
We
Right.
cover our bets. No, I'm going to do what's safe.
Yeah.
So that has to be celebrated. I mean, the kids really need to be made to feel good about taking that risk because it is risky. Now, the one thing you haven't mentioned yet, so I'll bring it up because so here's the downside in the virtual environment. Tuning. I'll say it again, tuning.
Uh-huh.
Wait, I didn't say it enough times. Tuning. So what I would say to in music education, now on the practical side of things, one of the things that's great about the Schulwerk and the barred instruments that I mentioned before is that the instruments sound beautiful and they're perfectly in tune. So the downside to ukulele, even more so than say recorder or whatever, is that being able to identify pitch correctly is something that has to take place before the students are really doing anything else. Now, when I was in the classroom with them, I used to tune the instruments myself. I would do that, and I got to a point where it was a little scary. I could do like 45 ukuleles in 5 minutes because it just becomes like this thing you do.
Right. But
we can't do that now.
Right.
So if one thing I will just say is not to plug any particular brand, but if you are a teacher looking for getting into ukuleles as an elemental music idea, make sure that the ukuleles you buy have snarks or some other kind of headstock tuner that come as part of the kit. And also make sure that you make a video for your students showing them how to tune it.
Yeah.
And don't use friction pegs.
Right.
They're too hard for the kids to get a handle on.
Right.
So that's the one sort of technical side, that one downside to this. And I know this because this is the first year we're doing it virtually. And I can tell you we spent a lot of class time just on the tuning idea.
That's a great point. And while I'm thinking of it, and thank you for mentioning this, because it is important, but let's save teachers anguish, time. A lot of the times, look, we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. So I would say to a teacher that's looking to buy ukuleles, and this is not an advertisement for any particular brand.
Right, no, I know.
Right? But I think you would agree with me.
You're about to say get better instruments.
Get better instruments,
yes. Yeah. No, I agree with 100%.
Or at least change the strings. If you're getting cheaper instruments, get those cheap strings off of there and put some good strings on, because I have ukuleles like this one, a few others. When I pick it up, even after a week, it doesn't need much tuning.
That's right.
I have one ukulele that's just always in tune. I mean, I'd have to try to knock it out of tune. It's just always in tune. I don't know what magic it was made from, but it just so it's in it. But it's a better instrument. It's a several $100 ukulele. Now, I'm not saying we're going to buy that for classroom, but yeah,
right.
Buy the best instruments you can.
You can get, there are a number of brands, there are a number of sort of the entry levels. And again, I'm not mentioning any brands, but there
Yeah.
are some brands on the market in that $60 to $75 price point that
Right.
hold their tune quite well.
Right.
Um, and the thing is that the other part of this is you just talked about. This is the thing that I figured out this year is that I needed to formally do when before I was handing out the instruments to the students, which is freaky because they basically drive up to the school and everyone has masks on. You hand them the ukulele through the window and then you wave,
Mm.
and the next time you see them is on your computer.
Mm.
But having said that, I actually set up every instrument. I did,
Uh-huh.
as you said, put on better strings,
Uh.
made sure everything tuned them. Oh, basically overtuned a little bit. Then I
Yeah.
went back. Strings are plastic; they stretch out.
Right.
So, this is the thing. And as I said, ask around if you're thinking of getting into this in a big way, getting a classroom set. Ask around the teachers that in your district or your co-teachers or whoever people experience what brand they like, but always ask how does it hold its tune, because that's
Right.
the number one. That even more so than tone, I would say that's like number one critical. And then I will also say that the kids seem to like the wooden ones better,
Uh-huh.
but the plastic ones you can wipe off. So
Right.
just saying. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and lastly on that, just remember that if you're trying to save a little money by getting cheaper ukuleles, you will pay with your
Oh, no
time
question.
later tuning. So think about that, because you're gonna have to tune those over and over and over and over. That's a lot of time. So as a teacher, get the school to pony up, or the PTA or whoever's paying for these ukuleles. Get the better instruments, because that's going to recoup your time with your students later. That's a big investment.
There's one other thing that well, there are several other things, but there's
Yeah.
one thing going back to the elemental music idea, and the
Yeah.
tuning made me think of it,
Yep.
because what you should always do, you should always see these challenges as opportunities, instructional opportunities. So the thing that's great about the ukulele is that you can use them to illustrate for students in a very clear way what the significant intervals are in the
Right.
scale.
Mm.
So for singing,
Mm-hmm.
they're great because after all, what you're doing is you're taking a pitch matching device, a pretty good one, and you're putting it in the kid's hand. So now instead of
Mm-hmm.
you're up at the piano, they're over there. I mean, this is even if we're not able to sing. So now they would have plastic masks on and be 12 feet apart and outside, and you'd still be over there at the piano trying to play. This is a G. This is you're putting in their hands an instrument that they can match pitch to.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's great about that is that they have in terms of ear training, it's really wonderful. And I find, I'm also pretty serious about, that's my training is as a recorder teacher in Orff-Schulwerk, but I find, which is a similar type device that's also
Right.
used because it helps train the voice.
Right.
But I actually find the ukuleles to be very, very successful at doing this. Again, provided that they're in tune. And that's why, and I've had that conversation with my upper grade students already. Like, this is why we have to be in tune, or we at least have to have the intervals correct.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you're singing in tune with your ukulele and it's set up correctly,
Mm-hmm.
at least you are singing in the correct pitch range. You're singing and then again, it's nice because C to C is kind of in a range that a lot of the kids can do. But of course, when you're singing with kids, F is a great key
Mm-hmm.
to sing in with I find with elementary age singers.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, it's like the second, no, not maybe the second, but the second or third easiest chord to make
Right.
on the ukulele is an F.
Right.
So doing exercises after they go through the C, I would probably learn C or A minor as the first chord,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the first two chords.
Right.
Then I would go to an F next. Because not only does that C, it gives you that C-F relationship. There's a fair amount of material that's in C and F.
Right.
It also gives you opportunity to play stuff that's in F,
Exactly. And then you've got F and C7. So you do all your 1-5 songs. You can do them
Exactly.
in F. Yeah. Even before you go to C, G7, right? Because then G7 is sort of a little bit up from F in terms of difficulty. All right, a 3-finger
Right.
chord as opposed to a 2-finger chord. But that's a great point. And even on the Orff instruments, it's pretty easy to play in the F pentatonic as well, right?
That's exactly right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And, um, this kind of gives me, well, no, I mean, I don't want to pivot to a different topic yet. I was
Mm-hmm.
about to start talking about, because this would be more a question for you, Kalani, with your
Mm-hmm.
percussion background. But
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned before, and I really believe this, that I think about the ukulele as a percussion instrument. I mean, how do
Mm-hmm.
you find that to be the case in your practice?
I I've become fond of reminding people that strumming is drumming. I
Yeah.
say strumming is drumming. And the reason I say that is because if your rhythm is not steady and you're playing an ukulele, then everything is affected, right? It's like that old saying, like, well, I don't know if it's an old saying, but there's an adage that's, a great band with a mediocre drummer is going to sound worse than a mediocre instrumentalist band with a great drummer, right? The band with the great drummer is always going to sound better than,
Well, sure. And
right?
you and I have been around long enough to know the story of the early days of some of the big rock and roll groups that they always had a sessions drummer for recording, and then they had
Right,
the person they took on the road. It's different person entirely.
right.
Because having a, like a Wrecking Crew style band to set your groove in the studio is everything.
It's everything. It,
Um,
it affects
yeah.
people so deeply, just the groove. I mean, the feel, right? And at this level, we're just talking about steady beat, probably, right? But just to be able to have that steadiness, whether it's down, down, or you're doing, like, I teach the reggae strum, right? I'm teaching some music teachers ukulele, and the reggae strum, ba da, ga da, down, up, down, up, that
Right.
gets a lot of people. It's not that easy for people. So if you get that drumming action, I'd say just, it's drumming. It's the same action, strumming and drumming. So in that regard, I would say it relates to percussion. But the definition of a percussion instrument includes plucking, right? It includes
Right.
striking, scraping, plucking, slapping, whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
And the connection that was, was not always clear where I'm going with this stuff. But we were just started on this topic of Orff-Schulwerk. So
Yeah. Yeah.
one of the things that Orff-Schulwerk does is that, and this is maybe, I don't want to call this a downside, is it is very, very much, and in this regard, if you're talking about down, even to the extent of using simple graphic notation to indicate, the subdivision of a beat, well, that's also can be illustrated beautifully on ukulele with, the down up strumming.
Right.
So if all your downs are tas and your TTs are down up,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a way of connecting all of
Right.
this together, and the students are used to looking at that. But in this virtual environment we're in, it's harder to do that because synchronicity
Mm-hmm.
over Zoom is rarely possible. So one way to do that is what you and I are doing right now, which is that in a simple setting where it's one on one,
Mm-hmm.
it's more synchronous. But the more people that you add to the meeting, the more the classroom, once you get it, your classroom gets up to 8, 10, 12 or more students,
Yeah.
that starts to break down, sound quality breaks down. And what do you do about that? So another great technique, which also takes it in the direction of Orff-Schulwerk, but also takes it in the direction of blues and rock and roll and playing with a certain sense of swing. He's using language,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of language, like you think about shooby-doo and all these different kinds of that terminology. That's referring to a shuffle on a chordophone of some kind, by and
Mm-hmm.
large.
Mm.
Um, boom daddy, boom daddy, boom daddy, boom daddy, boom. So when I'm teaching kids, again, we talked about picking individual notes, but invariably, particularly when they start singing, you're gonna ask them to keep some interesting groove going
Mm-hmm.
on their instrument while they sing on top of it, which is a really, with care, you can guide them to that. But that sort of independence, being able to multitask in that way, is a very, very advanced musical skill,
Right.
which I find in ukulele. If you don't stress how hard it is, they don't think about it and they just do it. But it does help to have, for your strumming patterns, have a bunch of language that you can use, phrases, including scat phrases that have embedded with them the sense of rhythmic nuance.
Could you give a couple examples of that? Just to, you mean?
Well, for example, you mentioned before. So you mentioned before um, uh, the C to the C and the F and the C7.
Uh-huh.
So one of the things that I teach with my students is typically in the C, it's the third box. C chord's
Uh-huh.
the third box on the first string.
Uh-huh.
But I go ahead and put the first finger in the first box of
Mm-hmm.
that string. And I can just lift my finger. So there's a shuffle between that.
Uh-huh.
So if I was to do something like, if I was to teach something like the blues song Spoonful by Willie Dixon. So the vocal, a little chorus to be, could fill a spoonful of diamonds. Okay, so I'm going to shuffle here, and what I'm going to teach the kids is shooba dooby yabba dooby shooby. That's shooba dooby yabba dooby yay, and then shooba dooby yabba dooby heebie deebie yabba dooby shooba dooby yabba dooby jay. So. Right. So now they will not be able to. That sounds awesome when you got to 20 kids all doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, of course, they don't say shooby dooby. They just play it, and then they're singing on top of that the Willie Dixon song.
Mm.
But what they can do is that they can develop that singing and playing and accompanying themselves on their own.
Right.
And I find that it's a lot easier to explain. I mean, let's face it, even when you're talking about standard notation, we still haven't figured out an accurate way to reflect that what I think of as a conversational style. This sort of like, it's swingy, it's a little indeterminate. And it has to do with something that's informed my philosophy, ironically, even more in this setting, which is this idea of a musical conversation as opposed to you play this part, I play that part.
Right, right.
When I talked about the open windows before, I try to stay away from filling it up with notes.
Yeah.
Because in this environment, we're not able to play in that highly structured, highly precise way. So it's better to use some of those rhythmic and musical ideas that are derived from the idea of solo, choral, question, answer, call, response, these various forms that they still hold up.
Right.
Because there it's the value of the testimony that's being given and the importance of the witnessing from the community, just to borrow the terminology of like blues call and response. It's more important than making sure that you're actually on the beat. It's more about the groove.
Right.
The groove is a little bit less locked to the beat.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work for you, can always record a bunch of techno and send that to them as a file, and they can play along with that. So
and that's fun too, and it's great to do.
That's really fun too. Yes,
it's great to do everything. But I love that you're, even able to. And this is the beauty of Orff-Schulwerk, is that Orff welcomes everything. Right, everything can be part of Orff, and you're saying, yeah, let's use these American or song styles that kind of have roots in the African diaspora or whatever it is. That are very American at this point, blues and certain types of styles that we would maybe associate.
Orff has always made one of the reasons it was successful as a sort of thing that was exported to all different countries. There's Orff,
every
communities in many all over the world.
Yeah,
is because it basically it lends itself very well to all kinds of folkloric traditions.
Right.
And in the United States, when songs like Kansas City and, Rock Around the Clock, those are like 60 years old. Mm-hmm. It's time to call them what they are, which is American folkloric material. It's not just, the early days of rock and roll. And so, and by the way, that will also give you opportunities to talk about the importance of all of this with your students, the kinds of music that is stimulating to them. And this is the essence of cultural responsiveness is to really delve into what is, what sort of let's say, lack of a better term, native to
Right.
the people in your classroom. And one of the things, it's popular culture that we all have in common. So that's a great place to start. And of course, the ukuleles sound great. You can, jamming over a whole variety, as we've already said, of pop tunes.
Yep.
And you'll quickly figure out which ones are like sound pretty good.
And
Um,
one of the things that I think works really well with the ukulele integrated into the elementary school instrumentarium is the fact that it is used by pop musicians. It has been used by adults. It's used in movies. People see it. Whereas, as awesome as the barred instruments are, and the recorder,
yeah, they don't sound like that.
they don't continue, right? Except for maybe specialists like recorder ensembles
Well,
but you never
when
see
you're a
them
recorder
again.
specialist, you know the names of the 3 pop tunes that have recorder in them.
Right,
that
right.
actually have recorder in them.
Stairway
And
to
it's
Heaven.
hilarious. So it's Ruby Tuesday by the Stones, right? A Fool on the Hill by the Beatles.
Yeah.
And there's something that I'm trying to think of which one it is from Jimi Hendrix, Axis Bold as Love,
Oh.
which supposedly there's this weird kind of distortion thing, but there's some recorder in there because there was one sitting around the studio when they were recording the album. So Jimmy just played everything and then broke everything, and.
And Stairway to
So
Heaven.
the recorder
Don't
is in
forget
there
Stairway
too.
to Heaven. Led Zeppelin.
Oh my God! Yeah. By the way, just mentioning. So yes,
Yeah.
of course. How did I forget that one?
Yeah.
So and that
But-
is if I'm not mistaken, that's a La pentatonic on A.
There you go.
Little lick there that you can play. So on the
Yeah, yeah.
recorder, which means
But-
you can also kind of strum along on your ukulele for a while anyway.
Nice.
Stairway
Well,
to Heaven, yeah.
But I love the fact that you're using an instrument that is used, in professional music all the way through time, through the rest of your life. You can keep playing ukulele. And you're connecting the children, the students at the very beginning of their music making with valid, established forms like these blues forms, call and
Right.
response, that are again, this isn't like children's music, it's just music.
Well, there's a great quote, and I always ask him where he comes from. He doesn't remember where he said it, but it's in one of Doug Goodkin's books about and you know Doug because you
Yeah.
trained with him, but
Yeah.
about Orff, meaning he was talking about the barred instruments, but Orff is a music that adults and children can agree on.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I presume he meant that it doesn't have that kind of, aren't they cute?
Right.
It has a sophisticated
Right.
feeling, which is, and you can, as a parent and as somebody who, I was my own my own children's music teacher. So I had the experience of watching them play this music and teaching them, to the best of my ability and having them be hypercritical. But the bottom line was, it is very satisfying. I find that the ukulele has that same quality, particularly playing that kind of music. It feels sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get old fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's capable of expressing a greater emotional range than just "Aren't we happy? Aren't we cute?"
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of this is that that's important to know, because if I've learned anything from working with kids in this distance environment, it's that kids have a much wider emotional range. They're rarely given the credit
Right.
for the sophistication of thought that they have and how deeply they feel things.
Yes.
So the greatest gift you can give them in terms of music education right now is an opportunity to express some of those ideas. So again, I think the ukulele is it's very well set up for doing all those things. But yeah, sure, it can also play. Now we have to do famous ukulele songs that are the pop tunes.
Well, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, right? Israel,
Of
Kamaka,
course.
Viva Ole.
I was thinking, Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter, and
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
showing my
there's-
age, Kalani.
There's the Jason Mraz stuff. There's the Tiny Tim.
That's right. Oh yeah, I forgot about
You
that.
know.
Doesn't Bruno Mars have? Isn't there ukulele in that one song that's actually in C?
I think he does
1, 2,
have
3,
some.
something
Yeah.
like- yeah.
Yeah. There's a bunch.
And of course, Eddie Vedder is a serious, actually. Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam is a serious ukulele player.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really helps. It's validating, right, for
Mm-hmm.
young players, school age children, to see that connection like, hey, yeah, I'm playing this, and so is that guy, and that guy's cool, and she's cool, and I'm doing this too, you know.
Right. You have a sense that you're part of a community. It's like when I was in high school band and I was a French horn player,
Hmm.
and I'm sure I was the only kid at my school that knew who all the famous French horn
Right.
players were,
Of course,
like
yeah.
particularly in the metropolitan area, because
Yeah.
it's kind of like, yeah, they do that and I do that. So there's an element of that, and I'm not proposing that these more sophisticated forms of music necessarily lend themselves to being performed by students, but it's remarkable how many things can be,
Hmm.
and how many. So for years I wanted to do, just because it's such an LA song, um, Lowrider,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and wanted to play it on the I wanted to play it on the barred instruments, because you can play that groove. That's a
Right.
very pretty modal groove, and there's a nice little recorder part. But the thing that really makes it come to life is,
Uh-huh.
so that's just a G7
Uh-huh.
F shuffle,
Right.
which my fourth and fifth graders could handle with a little practice. And it also gets them this idea of always being on the down, kind of being on the starting on the up. So you're
Hmm.
getting a little that kind of syncopation.
Hmm.
And it just, the thing, when we added that to the percussion parts and the barred instruments parts that we were already doing, the thing just came to life.
Yeah. And just getting back to what you asked about how it relates to percussion, why ukulele is a
Right.
percussive instrument. Another thing, and this is obvious, but I'm just going to say it, is that when you want to play upbeats, right? They are up.
Yeah,
Right? Upbeats are up, downbeats are down.
exactly.
Whereas that's not the case on the barred instruments, right? So everything's down
No.
to
Well,
play
the
it,
other thing about
you know?
ukulele in general is that, and this is true for recorder as well, but this is my only objection to the barred instruments is that when you play the barred instruments, when the students play them, they look at the instrument.
Right.
Play ukulele or play recorder, you look at the instructor
Exactly. Or each other.
or
Yeah.
your partner or whoever it is. So you're
Yeah.
looking, so that eye contact thing, which is so important in music, comes back into play
Yeah.
in a way. And you realize that it isn't just about the innate sense of time that helps the students stay together. It's also the kind of nonverbal communication, the eye contact, and so on. And
Oh,
if you look at any band on stage, you see the same thing. I mean,
right.
all those cats have, incredible sense of time and whatever, but nevertheless, there's lots of eye contact, lots of, you going to do this? Am I going to do?
Right.
And I think that, and that's also something that I've tried to incorporate into the playing. So what I recommend is that when you don't be in a rush
Hmm.
to get your students to move on to the next chord, just so it can say, hey, they learned 5 chords this
Right.
year.
Right.
Keep them
Yeah.
on 2 chords
Exactly. Yeah.
and let them get really comfortable doing it, and show them how versatile it can be. And if necessary, transpose some of the material you're doing. Why not?
Yeah, I like that because I believe too that when any musician is learning an instrument, the quicker they can get to a feeling of comfort, I don't want to say mastery, but let's just say kind of mastering, 1 or 2 chords, or at least being comfortable. Now they can really focus on music making instead of always feeling like they're behind. Because when you throw on another chord, it reminds me of math, right? You never felt like you really nailed math because there was always the next thing. There were always the next, the next problem you had to learn, the next theorem. And so you always had this
Right.
feeling like you never knew it. Whereas we have an opportunity when we're teaching music to sit with, that's why we like sitting with that pentatonic scale for so long, right? There's so much
Exactly.
music you can make. Yeah.
And you just said something else which is really interesting, which is the idea that like always rushing through, always feeling at a little disadvantage.
Right.
And when I was first living in Los Angeles and attempting to play tennis, was not long lived. But I was always told by the people that did that, you have to play with people that are better than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've decided that, at least as far as, maybe that's true for tennis, but as far as music is concerned, not necessarily. I mean, it's good to have one or two people
Yeah.
in the group that can kind of act as the drum circle leader, if you will, in effect, and kind of be the glue to hold everything together. But by and large, it's better to not. I don't think, and I may be wrong about this, but most people are not there in a musical experience um, to be the best one. They're
Hmm.
not there to improve their skills to the end. I mean, that's private lessons. There's lots of different venues for that. But in general, when you're talking about classroom education or just group playing like that, I'm much more a believer in a participatory music model,
Right.
which that idea comes from the writer Thomas Torino. I don't know if you're familiar with Music as Social Life, uh, a famous book by Thomas Torino. It talks about this very idea.
Mm-hmm.
The students, by and large, I find are there because they want to have fun and they
Mm-hmm.
want to be with their friends.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, their their emerging understanding about music has to be tied to that and not tied to some uh, list of guidelines about the quarter note today, dotted quarter note next week.
Right.
Forget that.
Achievement. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and especially now, where social and emotional learning is so important because of this, the pressure everybody's under.
Right.
But the other part of it, that thing you were saying, there was talking about the scaffolding. What you just when you were describing your math experience, to me that sounds like the scaffolding
Mm-hmm.
that has been imposed on you based on what the teacher's idea of what the sequence is.
Right.
And real education, especially kind of experiential music education, is about giving them the tools to make their own scaffold,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So you want to put the ideas out there, you want to show your students a range of possibilities, and then you want to let them connect that to what they already know.
Right.
And you do that in a couple of ways. One, as we've already talked about, is to expose them, to show them the connections that exist that occur to you. But in the end, the thing that's going to really be valuable to them and be part of their musical understanding for life is going to be the connections they make on their own. So keep it simple. Don't. It's not a rush to get to the most advanced version of whatever it is. Keep it easy.
Right. Yeah. Super easy. I love easy. Most of the playing that I do as a professional in my music therapy work and music education is pretty easy. Whether that's playing drums or ukulele or whatever, or singing. Because it's fun. Because then we can move on to the interpersonal connection. We can look at each other. We can play around with the music. There's a lot of space in the music, right? Simple elemental music, like you started off talking about. When there's a lot of space and it's simple, well, what does that afford me the luxury to do? It affords me the luxury to insert my own ideas into it because it's not all full, right?
Right. No, I agree. And you were just as you were just saying that, I was thinking about the beauty of playing those open strings, going back to where we started the conversation, is that they ring so when the ukulele's in tune. Did I mention tuning? Tuning's important. I don't know if I mentioned tuning enough.
What is that?
Tuning, yes. Tuning's super important. But when the instrument is in tune and you're playing those individual strings, the
Yeah.
way they ring, which is also by the way another argument for getting a slightly better instrument,
Mm-hmm.
because it'll tend to have a more sustained sound.
Right.
But what you really do is it's almost like, and I also like to talk to the students, not to go off on another tangent this late in the game, but
Mm-hmm.
I like to show them the vibrations. You show the strings vibrating back and forth and say,
Uh,
yeah, see, you can actually see the sound
right. Right.
on it. That's true on guitar as well. But I mean, on the ukulele, you can actually see what's physically happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So
It's
is
pretty
that?
neat.
Yeah, it is. And quality, you know, eh, quality music. I believe, and I always recommend. It starts with quality sounds, right? Quality tones. Because
Yes.
what's the music made of? It's made of all those tones. So if you have a quality drum, a quality recorder, a quality ukulele, quality everything, then it's going to sound better. I mean, and again, it's not that we're trying to make a record, but
Right.
we notice it. People notice it, and I think people appreciate just a nice tone, and I'll leave it at
Yeah.
that. It's not a matter of like judging one person against another or anything. It's a matter of like we want the music to sound good. We want it to be pleasing. We want it to, have a nice tonal quality.
That's right. And the thing is that you mentioned that saying, well, we're not making a record, but that's something else that's become much easier to actually record.
Yeah.
Your average, computer or peripheral device comes very often comes loaded with software that can do a nice job recording the playing.
Mm-hmm.
So just to extend that part of the conversation, I'm starting to do more and more of that where I'm working using Flipgrid and a couple of other where students are actually able to, the classes that we are weekly or twice. I meet my students twice a week. So those twice a week classes are more about facilitating.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of the individual instruction can go on in a setting like this one where it's just two people. Or, they'll send me a video and I'll send them a video back. So,
yeah. I mean, it's an amazing time for technology and music and recording, and now classroom students can get a taste of the technology that we as musicians have been using for a long time, like recording, microphones and different programs to record music. I think it's super exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything else before we wrap up? I really appreciate you.
Oh, so many things. But it's funny. You can be going here, and you realize, wow, there's a lot. It's a lot that I didn't talk about. But I think that that's the basic idea is just I am finding in this environment. This is apart from the ukulele stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just finding that it's easier to zero in on my students as individuals in the setting for a variety of reasons. Mm. Now, some of that is also because my class size has gone down. I'm seeing them in smaller groups.
Mm-hmm.
But I really believe that it is the trick to all of this, whatever you decide, because you might be somebody that is a Kadai trained person that's just using the ukulele to kind of, to sustain a singing program of some kind. And for that, it works really well. You could be somebody that is coming at this an entirely different, more of a pop-based. I know that programs like Little Kids Rock and stuff like that use ukuleles as a prelude to guitar and what have you. Mm-hmm. But whatever your game is, I just think you want to pay attention to what the kids are doing, like how engaged are they, and do they look genuinely satisfied by whatever musical experience you're giving them.
Right.
And part of that is, of course, abandoning your own notions about what success as a musician looks like.
Right.
If you've ever watched kids, you ask them to pick out some simple pattern on the ukulele, and you look down at them, and it's something you've played a dozen times. You look down, and you see their hands are shaking a little bit because they're so afraid of making a mistake.
Right.
And,
right.
Yeah. But so you compare that, you think about something as a professional musician, like what's your thing where your hands shake? That's where they are emotionally. So you've got to do what you can to mitigate that, because eventually if you give them too many experiences like that one, they won't want to do music anymore, or they'll say, and later on in life, they'll be one of those people that says, oh, I'm not good at music.
Right.
I can't sing. I can't carry a tune.
Right.
And you don't want that.
Exactly. And that is the important thing to remember. And I'm glad we're kind of wrapping up on that. I had thought about that earlier, and I'm so glad you came back to that, because if we're not creating lifelong learners and people that are excited about music, then what are we doing? Right. You could have the best, or what you think is the best recital, and then they walk away and say, "Whoa, I'm never doing that again." Right. So, we want the people that are going to keep on making music and integrate it into their lives and have fun playing music with their friends and their families and for their children someday and for their grandparents and in their communities, and just making music. Pick up that little ukulele and sing a song.
Have you ever been to the I don't know if I won't do it this year, I suspect, but the Disney Hall has, this will be a little anecdote. So Disney Hall had for many years an ukulele, not many years, but for several years. They had a ukulele get together, jam along, playing holiday music.
Oh, nice.
They've done other ones, but the holiday one was interesting. And they do it down, the one year I went, it was at Disney Hall. Then another year it was at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in this really beautiful space. And it's just people seeing a community coming together. Lots of Canadians, interestingly enough, because I think you probably know that the national, in the same way that recorders are the kind of primary elementary music instrument in the United States and other countries. In Canada, it was ukulele for many years.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I
So
didn't know that.
there are all these people who can play who are kind of like these Canadian expats that have found themselves in Los Angeles, LA being a place that people come from all over to be in. And but it's just so much fun to just sit there and play, and they give you the music. And there's been I haven't seen as much of this online, but there are, that's another thing to just consider doing. Like I find great satisfaction in, finding whatever the local little, the ukulele jam in whatever town you're in or whatever, and just going and joining in.
Yep.
Everybody's always welcome. I mean, it's really, really a fun thing to do.
It is.
And
Yeah.
that's another, so you talk about making lifelong, a kind of a lifelong love of music. For some of these Canadians who are all about, you could tell even what generation it was because they're all about 5 or 6 years older than I am.
Uh-huh.
And they had all studied in elementary school, and it had stayed with them their whole lives.
Wow.
Not changed their lives, maybe
Right.
in a couple of cases, but it allowed them to go and be part of this really cool thing down at downtown, play music. So
And it's those.
it's not bad.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you think that just goes back to their elementary school because it was a thing they valued. And however many years later, 50 years later, 40, 50 years later, it creates these beautiful experiences that are adding so much value, so much quality of life, enhancing the quality of their life. And that's what music's all about.
Exactly.
Hey, Rick, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been very interesting.
And people can find you at Richard Lawton Music.
Well, let's see. Website stuff. Well, I'm actually my website's sort of in transition right now, but the best way to get a hold of me is to you can I've got a Vimeo channel. It's under my name, Richard Lawton. There's a variety of things, the videos, a lot of the asynchronous stuff that I've done lately. It's sort of heavy with that. But some of the songs that I mentioned, including a couple of tutorials on how to do lowrider, are on the Vimeo channel. So just go on Vimeo and Google me, Richard Lawton.
Sounds good. I'm going to do that.
All right.
Check it out. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kalani. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Don't forget to vote.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Me too.